FRANKENSTEIN.
Robert Walton, an explorer in command of a ship ice-bound many hundreds of miles from land on a voyage to the North Pole, writes a letter to his sister in England.
My dear Margaret, so strange an accident has happened to us that I cannot forbear recording it, although it is very probable that you will see me before this can come into your possession. Last Monday we were surrounded by ice, which closed in the ship on all sides. Our situation was somewhat dangerous, especially as we were compassed by very thick fog. About 2 o'clock the mist cleared away, and we beheld stretched out in every direction vast and irregular plains of ice, which seemed to have no end. Suddenly a strange sight attracted our attention. We perceived a sledge drawn by dogs pass on towards the north, at the distance of half a mile. A being, which had the shape of a man, but apparently of gigantic stature, sat in the sledge and guided the dogs. We watched the rapid progress of the traveller with our telescopes until he was lost among the distant inequalities of the ice. About 2 hours after this occurrence, we heard the ground sea, and before night the ice broke and freed our ship. In the morning, however, we saw on a large fragment of ice another sledge, like that we'd seen before, and upon it a man dreadfully emaciated by fatigue and suffering. We brought him aboard, wrapped him in blankets, and took him to the shelter of a cabin, where we gave him some hot soup. Everyone questioned him, but I insisted that he be allowed to sleep undisturbed. Then, later in the day, I came alone to his cabin, and finding him awake, asked him why he had come so far upon the ice. He replied,
"To seek one who fled from me."
I told him of the giant figure we'd seen in the sledge driving northward. He sighed, and for a long time said nothing. At last he whispered,
"I thank you. My fate is nearly fulfilled. I wait but for one event, and then I shall repose in peace. Nothing can alter my destiny. Listen to my history, and you will perceive how irrevocably it is determined."
Then, and on succeeding days, he unfolded to me this weird and harrowing tale, which I record as nearly as possible in his own words.
I was born in Geneva, and my family, the Frankensteins, were among the most distinguished of that republic. My father fulfilled several public situations with honor and reputation. I am Victor, the eldest son. Our dear mother died when my 2 younger brothers, Ernest and William, were but infants. My parents had adopted a daughter, Elizabeth, much loved by all of us. She was of my own age. No word, no expression could body forth the relationship in which she stood to me. My more than sister, since till death she was to be mine only.
His voice sank to a mere breath. I urged him to say no more until he rested, but with burning eyes, and as if impelled by some irresistible power, he continued,
I went to the University of Ingolstadt, and was engrossed with the mysteries of man's soul and the secrets of heaven and earth. I delved into the occult works of Cornelius Agrippa and Paracelsus. In vain did my teacher seek to deflect me to the discoveries of modern science. I would not leave my study of the ancient alchemies. But I learned chemistry, and one professor instructed me so well in the procedures and mechanisms of the laboratory that soon I had surpassed all in learning and practice, and was the astonishment both of students and faculty. For 2 years I paid no visit to my home in Geneva.
My companion paused, his eyes searching beyond the confines of the small cabin where he lay. Then he leaned forward, seized my arm, and gazing intently at me, cried out,
"Remember, I am not recording the vision of a madman. The sun does not more certainly shine in the heavens than that which I now affirm as true. I studied anatomy, I observed the natural decay and corruption of the human body. I wished, above all, to learn whence did the principle of life proceed. Darkness had no effect on my fancy, nor did the churchyard vaults and charnel houses where I pursued my search deter me. I paused and examined in detail all the changes from life to death, and death to life, until, from the midst of the darkness, a sudden light broke in upon me, a light so brilliant and wondrous, yet so simple, that while I became dizzy with the immensity of the prospect, I was surprised that I alone should be reserved to unveil so astonishing a secret. After days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation and life.
What?
Nay, more. I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter.
What do you mean? How could mortal man know this? What is this knowledge? Tell me.
My friend, you expect to be informed of this secret? That cannot be. I will not lead you on to your destruction and infallible misery.
If you could but share...
No! Listen to me. I resolved to begin the creation of a human being. As the minuteness of the parts formed a hindrance to my speed, it was necessary to make the being of an enormous size. That is to say, about 8 feet in height, and proportionately large. Who shall conceive the horrors of my dreadful work as I dabbled among the unhallowed damps of the grave? My limbs now tremble and my eyes swim with the remembrance. But then a restless and almost frantic impulse urged me forward. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. The rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It fixed its gaze full upon me. A convulsive motion agitated its limbs. I had intended that the features of its face and body should be beautiful. Beautiful. Great God! The yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. Oh, yes, the hair was of a lustrous black, and the teeth pearly white. But these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with those watery eyes, almost the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set, and the shriveled complexion and straight black lips. I rushed from the house in panic at the thought of what I had done. Breathless horror and disgust filled my heart, and I wandered the dark streets till dawn. Like one that on a lonesome road doth walk in fear and dread, and having once turned round walks on, and turns no more his head, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread.
When Victor Frankenstein plucked up his courage and returned to his rooms, he found the apartment empty. The monster had gone. Unable to believe his good fortune, he clapped his hands for joy and laughed. His laughter turned to wild hysteria, and he collapsed unconscious to the floor. For several months he was seriously ill with a nervous fever, nursed by his fellow student, Henri Clerval. To spare their grief, Elizabeth and Victor's father were told nothing of this. But just as recovery seemed secure, there came a letter.
My dear son Victor, you have probably waited impatiently for a letter to fix the date of your return to us. Would that I could give you a happy and glad welcome. But with tears and wretchedness I must tell you. William is dead. That sweet child, your brother, whose smiles delighted and warmed my heart, is murdered. Last Thursday we went for a walk in Plain Palais, and he wandered away and we could not find him. We searched the whole of that day and throughout the night. At 5 in the morning I discovered my lovely boy stretched on the grass, livid and motionless, the print of the murderer's finger on his neck. Come, dearest Victor, you alone can console us. Elizabeth accuses herself unjustly as the cause of his death. He had teased her to let him wear a very valuable miniature of your mother. This picture is gone, and was doubtless the temptation which urged the murderer to the deed. Come home to us, Victor, not brooding thoughts of vengeance against the assassin, but with feelings of peace and gentleness that will heal instead of festering the wounds of our minds. Your affectionate and afflicted father, Alphonse Frankenstein.
Victor made his melancholy journey home. By degrees, the calm of his native countryside restored his spirits, the lake, the streams, and the snowy mountains. Darkness had fallen when he reached Geneva, and the gates of the town were already shut. It would be necessary to pass the night in the village of Sécheron. But being restless, he resolved first to cross the lake by boat and visit the spot where poor William had been murdered. A storm was approaching, and lightnings played on the summit of Mont Blanc in the most beautiful figures. On landing, he ascended a low hill. The darkness and storm increased every minute, and the thunder burst with a terrific crash over his head. It was echoed from Célèves, the Jura, and the Alps of Savoy. Vivid flashes of lightning dazzled his eyes, illuminating the lake, making it appear like a vast sheet of fire. Victor clasped his hands and exclaimed aloud,
William, dear angel, this is thy funeral, this thy dirge.
Just then, a figure stole from behind a clump of bushes, its huge form and aspect more hideous than belonged to humanity. There could be no mistake. A flash of lightning revealed the filthy demon to whom he had given life. The figure passed quickly and vanished in the gloom. Another flash discovered him hanging among the rocks of the nearly perpendicular ascent of Mount Célèves. The monster soon reached the summit and disappeared. Victor remained motionless. The thunder ceased, but the rain still continued, and the scene was enveloped in impenetrable blackness, and he cried out,
He is the murderer! Nothing in human shape could destroy that fair child. Oh God, what have I done? What have I done?
In the dim light of the ship's cabin, Victor Frankenstein relived his agony.
No one can conceive the anguish I suffered the remainder of the night, which I spent drenched and cold on the hillside. When it was light, I directed my steps to the town. The weather cleared, and at sunrise I entered my father's house. How can I describe my homecoming? The warmth of affection.
Victor!
Victor, my son!
And the grief that overwhelmed us all.
Oh, Victor, what are we going to do?
My father informed me that the identity of William's assassin had been revealed. I started in panic, but he amazed me more when he told me that it was none other than Justine, our own serving maid, whom we loved almost as one of the family. I protested that she must surely be innocent.
Victor, my son, If she is, then God forbid that she should suffer. But she is to be tried today.
I looked at Elizabeth. She said to me with tears in her eyes,
My dear, you fill me with hope that you may find some means to justify my poor guiltless Justine. Alas, who is safe if she be convicted of crime? Yet you must know that the miniature of your mother, which little William was wearing that day, was discovered in Justine's pocket.
But how could that be?
I know not. Yet in spite of this, I rely on her innocence as I do upon my own. We have not only lost our darling boy, but this poor girl is to be torn away by an even worse fate.
She is innocent, Elizabeth. It shall be proved. Fear nothing. She must be acquitted.
How kind and generous you are. Everyone else believes in her guilt. I know it to be impossible.
The trial began.
Silence! Silence in the court!
Several odd facts combined against her. She had been out the whole of the night on which the murder had been committed. A market woman had met her on the road next morning, and on asking what she did there, had received a confused and unintelligible answer. Then the picture found in Justine's pocket was produced in evidence. And Elizabeth, in a faltering voice, proved that it was the same which, an hour before the child was missed, she had placed round his neck. A murmur of horror and indignation filled the court. All Justine could say in her defense was that she had spent the day searching for the boy, and when it had grown too dark to continue, had slept in a barn until daylight. Of her possession of the picture she could give no account at all. It was a complete mystery. The verdict was inevitable. She was condemned to die. The next day, to our amazement, she confessed to the crime. Later, in her prison chamber, we were allowed to see her. She fell on her knees before Elizabeth and cried bitterly.
Dear lady, I confessed, but I confessed a lie. My confessor threatened me with excommunication and hellfire if I remained obdurate. What could I do? I had none to support me. I confessed so that I might obtain absolution. But now that falsehood lies heavier at my heart than all my other sins. The God of heaven forgive me. I do not fear to die. That pang is past. God raises my weakness and gives me courage to endure the worst. My dear friends, may this be the last misfortune that you will ever suffer. Live and be happy, and make others so.
And on the morrow, Justine died. Elizabeth's heart-rending eloquence failed to move the judges. My passionate and angry appeals were lost on them. The evidence against her was too great. In vain I pleaded that I knew who the murderer was. My frantic story of a monster in the hills was dismissed as madness, and I could produce no shadow of proof. Nothing could revoke the sentence passed upon my wretched victim. She perished on the scaffold as a murderess.
Victor sought consolation from despair by wandering long hours in the mountains and valleys. Sometimes he rode on horseback, or, when the tracks became too steep, by mule. One day he came to the valley of Chamonix. The mighty Alps, whose white and shining pyramids and domes towered over all, seemed to belong to another earth, the habitation of another race of beings. Ascending ever higher among immense glaciers, the rumbling thunder of the falling avalanche could be heard. By nightfall, he arrived at the village of Chamonix and slept peacefully. In the morning, his spirits high in spite of the rain pouring in torrents, he resolved to climb the summit of Montanvert. The ascent was precipitous. Vast mists swirled up from the valleys, curling in thick wreaths around the opposite mountains, whose peaks were hidden in cloud. By noon he had reached the head of the glacier. Presently a breeze dissipated the clouds and mist, and across the field of ice rose Mont Blanc in awful majesty. His heart, which was before sorrowful, now swelled with something like joy, and he exclaimed,
Wandering spirits, if indeed ye wander, and do not rest in your narrow beds, allow me this faint happiness, or take me as your companion, away from the joys of life.
Suddenly he beheld at some distance the figure of a man, advancing with superhuman speed, bounding over the crevices in the ice. He trembled to perceive the wretch he had himself created, whose unearthly ugliness rendered him too horrible for human eyes. Its countenance bespoke bitter anguish, combined with disdain and malignity. Victor, in rage, cried out,
Devil, do you dare approach me? And do not you fear the fierce vengeance of my arm wreaked on your miserable head? Oh, that I could, with the extinction of your vile existence, restore those victims whom you have so diabolically murdered.
All men hate the wretched. Have I not suffered enough that you seek to increase my misery? But I am thy creature, and I will be mild and docile to my natural lord and king, if thou wilt also perform thy part. Oh, Frankenstein, I should be thy Adam, but am rather the fallen angel whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed.
Begone! There can be no community between you and me. We are enemies.
How can I move thee? Believe me, Frankenstein, I was benevolent. My soul glowed with love and humanity. Misery made me a fiend. The desert mountains and dreary glaciers are my refuge. These black skies I hail, for they are kinder to me than your fellow beings. Shall I not hate them who abhor me? Yet it is in your power to recompense me. Listen to my tale. The guilty are allowed by human laws to speak in their own defense before they are condemned. You accuse me of murder, and yet you would, with a satisfied conscience, destroy your own creature.
Cursed be the day, abhorred devil, in which you first saw the light. Cursed! Although I curse myself, be the hands that formed you.
Still thou canst listen to me, and grant me thy compassion. Hear my story. It is long and strange. Come to the hut upon the mountain. The sun is yet high in the heavens. Before it descends to hide itself behind yon snowy precipices and illuminate another world, you will have heard my tale and can decide. On you it rests whether I quit forever the neighborhood of man and lead a harmless life, or become the scourge of your fellow creatures and the author of your own speedy ruin.
Seated in the hut by the fire which his odious companion had lighted, Victor Frankenstein consented to listen, and thus the monster began his tale.
It is hard to remember the first era of my being. All was confused and indistinct. New sensations flooding in upon me without order or direction. I found that I could wander, and I walked and walked until, tormented by hunger and thirst and exhaustion, I came to the forest of Ingolstadt, where I ate berries from a tree and slaked my thirst from a running brook. Then I lay down and slept. I awoke at sunrise and proceeded on my travels. I came to a village, but hardly had I set foot within its boundaries before the entire population rose up against me, and bringing stones and other missiles drove me into the open country. I found refuge at last in a wretched hovel, but it was joined to a cottage of a neat and pleasant appearance. I heard a step outside, and beheld through an aperture in the wall a young girl of gentle demeanour carrying a pail of milk. A young man met her who relieved her of her burden, and together they entered the cottage. A small chink in the partition joining their habitation to that which I occupied enabled me for a long time to observe them. I saw also an old man, evidently blind, near a small fire, who took up a stringed instrument and began to play. The young girl sang most sweetly.
Where she her secret paradons, the rivers clearly flow. Her sun-like beauty shines so fair, our spring can never fade. The groves and meadows swell with flowers, the winds all gently blow. Who then can blame the life that strives to harbor in her shade?
It was a lovely thing to hear and see, even for me, poor wretch, who had never beheld aught beautiful before. For many weeks I watched them in secret. During the nights when they slept, I went into the woods and collected food for myself, and I slept for that part of the day when they dispersed in various occupations. By degrees, I made a discovery of great moment. I found that these people possessed a method of communicating their experience and feelings to one another by articulate sounds. I learned words, then sentences. After a while, I could share their emotions, thoughts, joys, and sorrows, and I discovered the mystery of letters, first peering through the crack in the wall at books under the candlelight. Then, later, I found a leathern portmanteau containing more books, which in my hovel I studied. The brain you created for me, Frankenstein, was quicker and sharper than ordinary man's, and soon I had assimilated an infinity of new images and ideas. One day I found some papers in the pocket of the robe I'd taken from your laboratory. They were the notes of your experiments in creating me. I was now able to read them. Accursed creator, why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turned from me in disgust? God, I had learned, made man beautiful and alluring after his own image. But my form is a filthy type of yours, more horrid even from the very resemblance. I have said that the old man was blind. So, one morning, when the young man and the girl had departed on a long country walk, I approached the front door of the cottage and knocked. I heard the old man's voice.
Who is there? Come in.
I am a traveller in want of a little rest. Allow me to remain, if it please you, a few minutes before the fire.
Enter, and I will try in what manner I can relieve your wants. But I am alone and blind, and I shall find it difficult to procure food for you.
Do not trouble yourself, my kind host. I have food. It is warmth and rest only that I need.
Sit down then and talk. Are you a stranger to this country?
I am an outcast, an unfortunate and desert creature. Certain friends have turned against me whom I sincerely love, but a fatal prejudice clouds their eyes. They behold me only as a detestable monster.
I am blind, and cannot judge of your countenance, but there is something in your words which persuades me that you are sincere. I also am unfortunate. I and my family have been condemned, though innocent. We are exiles in this land. Judge then if I do not feel for your misfortunes. If you will confide in me, perhaps I may be able to intercede for you.
It is from your lips that I have first heard the voice of kindness. I shall be forever grateful, and your present humanity assures me of success with those friends whom I'm on the point of meeting.
May I know the names and residence of these friends?
My best and only benefactor. Now is the time. Save and protect me.
What?
You and your family are those friends that I seek.
What?
Do not desert me in the hour of trial.
Great God! Who are you?
At that instant the door burst open, and the girl and the young man rushed in. Who can describe their horror and consternation on beholding me? The girl fainted, and the young man with supernatural force tore me from his father, to whose knees I clung. In a transport of fury, he dashed me to the ground and struck me violently with a stick. I could have torn him limb from limb, as the lion rends the antelope, but my heart sunk within me, and in bitter sickness I fled never to return. Cursed, cursed creator Frankenstein! Why did I live? Why did I not extinguish the spark of existence which you had so wantonly bestowed? I know not. Despair had not yet taken possession of me. My feelings were those of rage and revenge. I could with pleasure have destroyed the cottage and its inhabitants, and have glutted myself with their shrieks and misery. I gave vent to my anguish in fearful howlings, and like a wild beast that had broken its toils, I destroyed all objects that obstructed me as I ranged through the woods with a stag-like swiftness. My travels were long and my sufferings intense, and I came at length to the environs of Geneva. It was evening when I arrived, and the sun was setting behind the stupendous mountains of Jura, when a beautiful child came running in my direction with all the sportiveness of infancy. Suddenly, an idea seized me that this little creature was unprejudiced and had lived too short a time to have imbibed a horror of deformity. If, therefore, I could take him and educate him as my companion and friend, I should not be so desolate in this peopled earth. Urged by this impulse, I seized on the boy as he passed and drew him towards me.
Let me go! Let me go!
Child, I'm not going to hurt you. Listen to me.
Monster, you are an ogre. You wish to eat me and tear me to pieces. Let me go, or I tell my papa.
Boy, you will never see your father again. You must come with me.
Hideous monster, let me go. My father is Monsieur Frankenstein. He'll punish you.
Frankenstein? You belong then to my enemy, towards whom I've sworn eternal vengeance. You shall be my first victim.
Ugly wretch, you vile thing!
The child still struggled and loaded me with epithets which carried despair to my heart. I grasped his throat to silence him, and in a moment he lay dead at my feet. I felt exultation and a hellish triumph, and shouted, I too can create desolation! My enemy is not invulnerable. This death will carry despair to him and destroy him. Then I saw something glittering on the child's breast. I took it. It was a portrait of a most lovely woman. For a while I gazed enraptured, but presently rage engulfed me that beauty such as this was forever denied me, and I ran from the place and sought somewhere to hide. I entered a barn which seemed empty. A woman was sleeping on some straw. She was young, not beautiful like her whose portrait I held, but youthful and comely. A fiend stirred within me. Because I was deprived of such beauty and companionship, I had committed murder. She must atone. She must suffer. I bent over her and placed the portrait in the pocket of her dress. I left her sleeping. Frankenstein, we may not part until you have promised to comply with my request. I am alone and miserable. Man will not associate with me, nor woman love me. But one as deformed and ugly as myself would not deny herself to me. You must create for me a female being with whom I can live in the interchange of those sympathies necessary for my life. This you alone can do, and I demand it of you as a right which you must not refuse to concede.
The being finished speaking, and fixed his looks upon his creator, who sat bewildered before him. For some moments there was silence. Then Frankenstein replied,
I do refuse. Shall I create another like yourself, with whom you might desolate the world? Have you not already shown a degree of malice that should make me ever distrust you?
I am malicious because I am miserable. Oh, my Creator, make me happy. Let me feel gratitude towards you for some benefit. What I ask of you is reasonable and moderate. I demand a creature of another sex as hideous as myself. Our lives might not be happy, but they would be harmless. We would go to the vast wilds of South America. You would never see us again. Have pity. I now see compassion in your eyes.
Yes, I see that I owe to you some portion of happiness. But swear on your solemn oath to quit Europe and the neighborhood of man, as soon as I deliver into your hands the female being who will accompany you in your exile.
I swear by the sun, and by the blue sky of heaven, and by the fire of love that burns my heart, that if you grant my prayer, you shall never behold me again. And fear not, but that when you are ready I shall appear.
Saying this, the monster departed. Descending the mountain with greater speed than the flight of an eagle, he was quickly lost among the undulations of the sea of ice. Victor Frankenstein returned to Geneva, but could not for many weeks collect the courage to recommence his work. His father pleaded with him to settle down at home and marry Elizabeth, whom he loved, and who loved him dearly. Victor longed for this, but he would promise nothing yet. Hearing of certain discoveries in England material to his own experiments, he decided to go there at once. He met his friend Henri Clerval in Strasbourg, and together they descended the Rhine by boat to Rotterdam, whence proceeding by sea to England they arrived in London. Here they spent some months studying and working, Clerval mostly at languages, and Victor with the new discoveries in science and medicine in which he was so deeply involved. They moved to Oxford, then travelled north. On reaching Perth in Scotland, Victor confided,
Henri, I may be absent for a time. Let this place be our rendezvous 2 months hence.
But, Victor...
Forgive me, but do not dissuade me, I entreat you. I must have solitude.
I understand, of course. But may the time pass quickly. I shall feel lost here without you.
Thank you, dear friend. I hope when I return it will be with a lighter heart than I have at present.
Goodbye, Victor.
Traversing the northern highlands, Victor decided upon one of the remotest islands of the Orkneys as the scene of his labours, hardly more than a rock, continually beaten upon by the waves, and sparsely inhabited. On the whole island there were but 3 miserable huts, one of them vacant, which he hired, and began his work. A shaft of the northern lights reflected from the ice field shone upon Victor Frankenstein's face as he related his long history to Robert Walton in the cabin of his ship.
My horrid labour was already far advanced, as one evening I sat in my laboratory. The sun had set, and the moon was just rising from the sea. It was not light enough to see my instruments and apparatus with which I worked. Then I began to have doubts about the wisdom of my employment. Perhaps this female being I was constructing might be 10 times more malignant than her mate. He had sworn to quit the neighborhood of man, but she had not. Might she not turn with disgust from him to man's superior beauty? I trembled. My heart failed within me. When, on looking up, I saw by the light of the moon the demon at the casement. A ghastly grin wrinkled his lips and expressed the utmost extent of malice and treachery. I thought with a sensation of madness on my promise of creating another like to him, and trembling with passion, I tore to pieces the thing on which I was engaged. The fiend cried out,
"You have destroyed my only refuge from despair. How dare you break your promise? I have endured toil and misery. I followed you from Switzerland. I crept along the shores of the Rhine among its willow islands. I have dwelt many months in the heaths of England and among the deserts of Scotland. I have suffered incalculable fatigue, cold, and hunger. How dare you destroy my hopes?"
"Begone! Never will I create another like yourself, equal in deformity and wickedness."
"Remember, I have power. I can make you so wretched that the light of day will be hateful to you. You are my creator, but I am your master. Obey."
"Devil! Do not poison the air with your malice. I am no coward to bend beneath words. I am inexorable."
"I go, but remember, I shall be with you on your wedding night."
That very night, Frankenstein sailed for the mainland. His boat was caught in a storm and driven far into the Atlantic. When the tempest subsided, he saw a line of hills on the horizon. Then, as he approached them, a small, neat town and a good harbour, which he entered. But an angry crowd gathered on the quay. He called out,
"Where am I?"
You'll know that soon enough. Maybe it'll not prove much to your taste, but you'll not be consulted as to your quarters, I promise you.
Why do you answer me so roughly? Is it the custom of Englishmen to receive strangers so inhospitably?
I don't know what the custom of the English may be, but it's the custom of the Irish to hate villains.
To his consternation, Victor was taken to the magistrate and charged with murder. Various witnesses gave evidence that a boat with one man in it was seen to sail away from that place where the corpse of a murdered man was afterwards found. The magistrate ordered that Victor be shown the dead body. He was led up to the coffin. Within it lay the lifeless form of Henri Clerval.
Have my murderous machinations deprived you also, my dearest Henri, of life? 2 I have already destroyed. Other victims await their destiny.
And he fell senseless to the ground. For a month he remained in a delirium. When he recovered, he was judged and condemned to be hanged. In the prison cell he awaited execution. The magistrate came to see him and spoke gently.
Someone, a friend, is come to visit you.
No, no! It is the fiend come to gloat over me! Oh, for God's sake, do not let him enter!
I should have thought, young man, that the presence of your father would have been more welcome.
My father? Is my father indeed come?
And Monsieur Alphonse Frankenstein was able to bring convincing proof that Victor had been far away in the Orkney Islands at the time of the murder. He was released from custody and accompanied his father home to Geneva. Within a few weeks, Victor and Elizabeth were married and travelled to Lake Como, there to spend the first days of their happiness in a villa by the shores of the lake. And thus he described their arrival.
The sun sunk beneath the horizon as we landed from the boat in which we had sailed for the last part of the journey. We were contemplating the lovely scene of waters, woods, and mountains, when suddenly the wind rose with great violence in the west, and a heavy storm of rain descended. I had been calm during the day, but now 1,000 fears preyed upon my mind. Elizabeth, her hand on my arm, asked,
"What is it that agitates you, my dear?"
"Oh, peace, peace, my love. This night and all will be safe. This night is dreadful. Very dreadful.
What is it you fear? Tell me.
I entreated her to retire, resolving not to join her until I had taken certain precautions against the fiend, my enemy, remembering his last terrible threat. She left me, and I continued some time walking up and down the passages of the house, inspecting every corner. My right hand grasped a pistol hidden in my bosom. Suddenly I heard a shrill and dreadful scream. I rushed to our room. Great God! Why did I not expire? Why am I here to relate the destruction of the best hope and the purest creature of earth? Elizabeth lay there, lifeless and inanimate, thrown across the bed, her head hanging down, and her pale and distorted features half covered by her hair.
In the icy wastes of the northern seas, Victor Frankenstein ended the tale of his sufferings and his avowed and relentless pursuit of the murderer. Exhausted, his voice became fainter and at length sunk into silence, and his eyes closed forever. The next day, when Robert Walton entered the cabin where his ill-fated friend lay dead, he saw, bent over him, a form, gigantic in stature, yet uncouth and distorted in its proportions, its face concealed by long locks of ragged hair. It turned towards him, and never was there a vision of such loathsome and appalling hideousness, and groaning deeply, extended a vast hand across the body of Frankenstein, uttering these words:
"That also is my victim. In his murder my crimes are consummated. Oh, Frankenstein, generous yet self-devoted being, what does it avail that I now ask thee to pardon me? I who irretrievably destroyed thee by destroying all thou lovedst. Alas, he is cold. He cannot answer me."
The monster then leapt from the cabin window onto the sledge which lay close to the vessel on the ice that had closed in again, and was soon borne away and lost in darkness and distance.